At my birthday dinner, a waitress slipped me a note. Don't sip that. 5 minutes later, I was turning 62 the night my life almost ended over a glass of wine. For most of that Friday, I'd been content to believe it would be an ordinary birthday, quiet, familiar, wrapped in the warm routine of my small world. By the time my son pulled up in front of Giovani's Trattoria, my favorite neighborhood Italian restaurant in Atlanta, I still had no idea that the evening would split my life cleanly into a before and an after. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Giovanni smelled like every memory I'd ever loved. Garlic simmering in butter, tomatoes slowly reduced on the stove, and the faint bite of red wine lingering in the air. The place was crowded with families and couples, light laughter threading between the clink of cutlery and the soft croon of an old jazz playlist. Soft golden bulbs hung from the ceiling, casting a hazy glow that made everyone look a little younger, a little softer around the edges. "Happy birthday, Mom," Marcus said, offering his arm dramatically as we stepped inside. At 35, he still had that boyish smile I used to see when I dropped him off at kindergarten. His dark hair was beginning to show a few silver threads, little reminders of the years we'd lived through together. But his eyes were the same warm brown that had always made me feel safe. Allison was already seated when we reached our table near the back. My daughter-in-law arose to greet us, smoothing the front of her simple blue dress. She smiled, but her lips seemed tight, as if the expression had been pinned on rather than arriving naturally. "Celeste, happy birthday," she said, leaning in to hug me. Her perfume was cool and floral, but beneath it I caught something I couldn't name, maybe tension, maybe my imagination. "Thank you, dear," I replied, letting the hug linger just long enough to be polite. I'd spent the last few years telling myself that Allison was shy, that the stiffness in her voice was nerves, not distance. After raising Marcus alone since his father died, I had wanted so badly to believe I'd gained a daughter. We settled at the table. The menus were almost unnecessary. I already knew what I planned to order. I've been coming to Giovanni's for so long that the waiters greeted me by name, and the owner always sent a little extra bread. It was a place that made me feel anchored. "Chicken parmesan?" Marcus guessed, grinning. "You know me too well," I said. He chuckled and reached for the wine list. "I thought we'd do this right tonight. Celebration calls for something nice." He flagged down the waiter and ordered a bottle of California Cabernet, pronouncing the name with unnecessary care that made me bite back a smile. As we waited, conversation drifted easily enough. Marcus talked about his job at the State Farm office downtown, complaining about paperwork and praising his latest promotion prospects. I told him about my new senior yoga class at the YMCA and the stubborn patch of azaleas in my garden that refused to bloom properly. Allison chimed in sporadically, always with a faint lag, as if she were half a beat behind the rest of us. Every so often her hand slid toward her phone, screen lighting up as she checked a notification before quickly turning it face down. I noticed it. I noticed the way her gaze flickered to Marcus whenever he laughed with me. I noticed the way her fingers drummed against the tablecloth when she thought no one was watching. But I told myself not to make a fuss. I had a lifetime of practice at swallowing discomfort to keep a fragile peace. The wine arrived in a dark glass bottle, the label elegant and understated. The waiter, balding, kind, and familiar, uncorked it with practiced hands, poured a small taste into Marcus's glass, and waited. My son inhaled the aroma, nodded appreciatively, and gave the go-ahead. "Only the best for you, Mom," he said, as the waiter filled all 3 glasses. The liquid caught the light as it poured, rich and deep, like garnet stones scattered in crystal bowls. "Mom, you look radiant," Marcus added, raising his glass. "Really? You do." There was that word again. Radiant. It was the same word my late husband had used on my 45th birthday. It tugged at something tender inside me. I felt my throat tighten as I smiled. Allison lifted her glass, too. "To Celeste," she said, "for being such a special mother-in-law." Her tone was smooth, but there was a slight pause before the word special, just long enough for something inside me to flinch. I told myself not to be silly. I lifted my glass, fingers closing around the stem. The wine's surface shivered faintly with the movement, a dark mirror reflecting the lights above us. That was when the waitress appeared. She was young, early 20s at most, with brown hair pulled back into a ponytail and tired eyes that still somehow looked alert. She approached our table with a cloth draped over one arm, as if she were simply coming to wipe a stray crumb from the tablecloth. "Excuse me," she murmured, leaning in. Her hand moved in one fluid, practiced gesture. To anyone watching, it would have looked like she was rearranging the breadbasket. But as she drew her hand back, I saw a small folded scrap of paper appear beside my plate, like a magician's trick. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. There was no polite smile, no generic customer service warmth. Instead, her gaze burned with something sharp and urgent, as if she were silently shouting. Then she straightened, turned, and moved away, disappearing into the blur of customers and staff. My heart stuttered. The restaurant's sounds grew muffled, as if cotton had been shoved into my ears. I glanced at Marcus and Allison. Neither of them seemed to have noticed anything. Marcus was reaching for his fork. Allison was staring at her phone again, her jaw clenched tight. With fingers that suddenly felt clumsy, I slid the folded paper onto my lap and opened it beneath the table. "Don't drink that. Your life is in danger. Trust me." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The letters were slanted, written quickly but clearly. No name, no explanation, just that solid block of dread in ink. I stared at the message until the words seemed to blur. A bitter little voice in my head whispered that it had to be a prank, a mistake, a joke in unforgivably poor taste. But then I remembered the waitress's eyes. That wasn't a joke. That was fear. The wine glass in my hand felt heavy now, the deep red liquid suddenly sinister. It had been poured at the table. No one had touched it after that. And yet the note sat on my lap like a stone. I forced myself to set the glass carefully back on the table. My fingers were shaking, so I tried to disguise it by reaching for my napkin. "Excuse me," I said, hoping my voice sounded normal. "I'm going to run to the restroom." Marcus looked up. "You okay, Mom?" "I just need to freshen up. Old lady problems." I tried to chuckle, and the sound came out a little too high. I slid the note into my pocket and rose, willing my legs not to betray me. The path to the restroom felt 10 miles long. Every breath felt like it scraped the inside of my chest. In the restroom, I locked myself in a stall and sat down heavily. I unfolded the note again, staring at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. "Don't drink that. Your life is in danger. Trust me." My pulse hammered in my ears. Who would want to hurt me? I lived a simple life. I had my little house, my garden, my yoga class, my son. Nothing about me seemed worthy of such drama. Unless it wasn't about drama at all. Images flickered through my mind. Allison's rigid smile, the tremor in her hands, the way she had been watching me when the wine was poured. I thought about the vague unease I'd felt around her lately, the way she always seemed to hover at the edges of my life, ever helpful, ever concerned. Was I being paranoid? Was I losing my mind? Or had I been ignoring something I didn't want to see? I splashed cold water on my face, stared at my reflection, and forced myself to think clearly. If the note was a misunderstanding, the worst outcome of being cautious would be a little embarrassment. If it wasn't a misunderstanding and I ignored it, the consequences didn't bear thinking about. By the time I walked back toward our table, I made my decision. Allison sat where I'd left her, hands clasped around her wine glass as if it were a lifeline. Marcus was laughing, gesturing with his fork, telling some story about an office misunderstanding. The world around them spun on, as if some invisible hand hadn't just pressed pause on my life. I slid into my seat and reassured Marcus with a smile I hoped looked convincing. "All good," I said lightly. My gaze shifted to the glasses on the table. 3 identical stems crowned with dark red wine. No way to tell them apart. But I knew which one had been placed in front of me, the one closest to my plate. As Marcus flagged down a waiter for more bread, turning his head away, an opening appeared, a sliver of time no longer than a handful of heartbeats. My hand moved almost on its own. I picked up my glass and Allison's, switching their positions with a calm, practiced motion I didn't know I possessed. I did it as if I were simply adjusting the table, moving a salt shaker out of the way. When I set them down again, my heart was threatening to climb out my throat. "Ready for that toast, Mom?" Marcus asked, turning back with a grin. I stared at the glass now in front of me, the one that had originally belonged to Allison. On the other side of the table, my daughter-in-law's fingers curled loosely around the one that had been poured for me. "Yes," I heard myself say. "Let's toast." We raised our glasses. "To family," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "To nights like this. To make it through more than we ever thought we could." Our glasses clinked. I drank. So did Marcus. So did Allison. The wine tasted the way it always did, full, dry, with a hint of blackberry. But it no longer tasted the flavor. I tasted only fear. And then there was nothing to do but wait and watch. 5 minutes later, my entire world shattered. At first, nothing happened. The restaurant noise rose and fell in comfortable waves. Plates arrived. I picked at my chicken parmesan, nodding along as Marcus discussed kitchen renovations and promotion tracks. I even managed to smile when he joked about his boss. But my attention never left Allison. She had always been a slightly nervous woman, given to fidgeting and over-explaining. At first, her movements seemed no different than usual. Fingers tapping against the glass, eyes flicking to her phone, lips twitching at the edges when she tried to smile. Then a subtle shift. Her hand strayed to her stomach. Her brow furrowed, and she blinked slowly, as if trying to clear fog from her vision. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice mild, still unaware of the current pulling beneath the surface. "I think so," Allison murmured. "I just feel a little strange. Probably something I ate earlier." Her complexion, usually delicately pale, began to lose what color it had. A sheen of sweat formed along her hairline, glistening faintly in the dim light. I set down my fork. My own hands were steady now. My fear had taken a new form. Something cold, focused, and sharp. "Maybe you're just tired," I suggested gently, though my voice felt hollow in my ears. Allison didn't reply. Her breathing had grown shallow, her chest rising and falling faster than before. Her grip tightened around her glass, so fiercely I thought it might shatter in her palm. "I really don't feel well," she whispered. Marcus's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. "Okay, that's it. We're going." But when Allison tried to stand, her legs seemed to forget how to hold her. She sagged back in the chair, eyes wide and glassy. "Call 911, I said, amazed by how calm I sounded. The chairs shifted. Voices rose. Nearby diners turned to look, faces blurring into one another as panic rippled through the room. Somewhere behind us, a waiter shouted for the manager. Someone ran for the phone. I watched my daughter-in-law's lips, noticing the faint bluish tinge creeping in at the corners. Her hands were trembling uncontrollably now, and her skin had taken on a lifeless, gray undertone that made my stomach twist. She drank from my glass, I thought. The thought had weight. It was an anchor in the sea of chaos. She drank what was meant for me. The paramedics arrived faster than I would have believed possible. They moved with efficient urgency, their questions overlapping with the stunned murmurs of the restaurant staff. Someone asked what she'd eaten. Someone else asked about allergies. Marcus tried to answer through a haze of panic, his voice breaking as he answered the same questions again and again. I stood back, clutching my purse in one hand and the folded note in the other. It felt like the only lifeline connecting me to sanity. On the way out, as they wheeled Allison past me, one of her hands slipped free of the blanket. Our eyes met for a single, searing second. In her gaze, I saw confusion, terror, and something else I couldn't quite name. Anger? Resentment? Regret? Then she was gone, swallowed by the night and the flashing red lights. "Come on, Mom," Marcus said hoarsely. "We're going with her." We climbed into the back of the ambulance, the siren already wailing. The world outside smeared into streaks of city lights as we sped toward the hospital. Marcus gripped my hand so tightly it hurt. I didn't pull away. "I don't understand," he kept repeating, as if the phrase could somehow rearrange reality. "She was fine. She was fine, Mom." I looked at him and felt a strange, bittersweet ache. This was the boy I had raised, The one who used to wake up from nightmares and run to my bed. The one I had protected from so many hurts. And now I knew something awful. I'd almost died in front of this same son, and he wouldn't have known why. The ambulance jolted around a corner. One of the paramedics glanced at us. "Ma'am, have you had anything to drink or eat that she also had?" he asked. "Just in case, we need to check you too." I opened my mouth. I closed it. My fingers tightened around the note until the paper crumpled. "Yes," I said carefully. "We all had the same wine. And dinner." His gaze sharpened, but he didn't press. Not then. At St. Jude Medical Center, the emergency department swallowed Allison in a flurry of movement, nurses calling out numbers and instructions. Marcus and I were directed to a row of hard plastic chairs in the waiting area. The overhead lights seemed too bright, washing all color from the room. Waiting is strange when you know that something terrible has happened, but don't yet know the shape of it. Time stops being linear. Minutes stretch like rubber bands. Every beep, every distant announcement over the intercom feels personal. "I don't get it," Marcus said again, staring at the floor. "What if it's something she ate at lunch?" I told her that the salad bar at the office looked sketchy. I could have told him then. I could have pulled the note from my pocket and shared the truth that was coiled in my chest like a snake. I didn't. Not yet. Maybe I was still hoping that there'd be an explanation that didn't involve what I already suspected. Maybe I needed a professional to say the word poison before I could fully believe it. It was well over an hour before a doctor approached, a young man with tired eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. His expression immediately made my stomach sink. "Mr. Montgomery?" he asked. Marcus jumped up. "Yes. How's my wife? Is she okay?" "She's stable for the moment," the doctor said, gesturing for us to sit. "But we need to talk about what caused the episode." He sat across from us, elbows resting on his knees, hands folded. It was the posture of someone who had given too much bad news in too short a time. "We ran initial blood work," he continued. "The results show extremely elevated levels of a cardiac medication, digoxin." Marcus frowned. "I don't understand. Allison doesn't have heart problems." "That's exactly why we're concerned," the doctor replied. "This medication is used in controlled doses to treat certain heart conditions. In the amounts we found, it is highly toxic. Potentially lethal." Lethal. The word rang through my skull. "Are you saying someone poisoned her?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I can't make that conclusion," he said carefully. "What I can say is that this level of digoxin doesn't appear by accident. We also detected alcohol, which can intensify the drug's effects. We're obligated to contact law enforcement. They want to ask you both some questions." Marcus surged to his feet, color draining from his face. This has to be wrong. She doesn't take any heart medication. We don't even have anything like that at home." The doctor watched him calmly, letting the words spill out and fall. Then he turned to me. "Mrs. Montgomery, did you consume the same food and drinks as your daughter-in-law?" "Yes," I said. "We shared a bottle of wine. We all ate dinner together." "Have you been feeling unwell?" "Dizziness, nausea, confusion, changes in vision." The question hung there heavy. My mind flashed through the last few months, moments I dismissed as part of growing older. The mornings when I woke up dizzy and blamed the heat. The evenings when I'd been too tired to climb the stairs and chalked it up to age. The odd lapses, forgetting a word mid-sentence, misplacing my keys in increasingly strange places. "Yes," I whispered, "but I thought I was just getting older." The doctor's gaze sharpened. "We'd like to run some tests on you as well. It's probably nothing, but under the circumstances." That was when the last thread of denial inside me snapped. "I need to show you something," I said, reaching into my pocket. I unfolded the note with care, smoothing it out before handing it to Marcus. His eyes scanned the lines quickly. As he read, the color drained from his face. "Mom," he breathed, his voice barely audible. "Where did you get this?" I told them. I described the waitress, the folded paper, the urgent look. I described the way I'd switched the glasses. I described how Allison had been watching me, watching that wine, all through dinner. By the time I finished, Marcus was sitting down again, elbows on his knees, his hands pressed to his forehead. "No," he said. "No, it doesn't make sense. Allison would never, she wouldn't hurt you. The doctor said nothing, but the look in his eyes told me he had seen too many families denying the obvious. Could that medication be slipped into a drink? I asked quietly. Yes, he replied. It dissolves. It's bitter, but in wine it could go unnoticed, especially if someone isn't looking for it. I thought of my glass, the deep red, the surface shivering under the light. I think, I said slowly, that whatever was in that glass was meant for me. Silence settled over us, dense and suffocating. We'll notify the police, the doctor said finally. And I'd like both of you to stay for further evaluation. Right now, we need to make sure you're safe. When he left, Marcus and I sat in shocked silence. Have you noticed anything strange about Allison lately? I asked, my voice soft. Anything at all? He stayed silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded distant, as if he were listening to himself from somewhere far away. She's been concerned about you, he said slowly. For months now. Concerned how? She kept saying she was worried about your memory, he continued. That you were repeating yourself, forgetting things. She'd come home from visiting you and tell me you'd left the stove on or that you couldn't remember conversations. She said we needed to start talking about long-term care options. The words landed heavily between us. Care options, I repeated. You mean a facility? A nursing home? He couldn't meet my eyes. She showed me brochures, articles about early signs of dementia. She said we needed to be prepared, that it wasn't fair to put all the responsibility on me if your condition got worse. I stared at him, feeling as if the floor beneath my feet had crumbled away, revealing a hidden drop I hadn't known I'd been standing over. I don't have dementia, I said. I misplace my glasses sometimes. I forget what I walked into a room for. That's normal. I'm not confused about who I am. I don't get lost coming home. I know, he whispered. God, Mom, I know that now. But at the time, she was so calm, so reasonable. She had charts. She'd highlight things in articles and tell me, look, Marcus, this is exactly what your mother is doing. I thought she was being a good wife. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. A pattern was beginning to emerge, faint but unmistakable. Someone had been nudging my life toward a narrative where my decline was inevitable and my money needed managing. The question was no longer whether the note was real. It was who had written the script I'd nearly followed into my grave. The next day blurred into tests, questions, and the heavy presence of strangers in suits who introduced themselves as detectives. They arrived shortly after the hospital called in the suspected poisoning. Detective Lieutenant Lee was the one who made the biggest impression. She was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled into a no-nonsense twist and eyes that missed nothing. She spoke softly but directly, the kind of person you instinctively wanted to tell the truth. Mrs. Montgomery, she said when we first met in a small consultation room. I'm very sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I'd like to go over what happened last night, from your perspective. Take your time. So I did. I told her about the dinner, the note, the waitress's eyes, the glass, the switch, Allison's collapse, the ambulance, the doctor's diagnosis. As I spoke, the detective took notes in small, neat handwriting, occasionally asking specific questions that cut to the heart of details I hadn't realized were important. Which side of the table had I been sitting on? Who poured the wine? Did I ever leave my glass unattended? Had I noticed Allison handling the bottle? When we were done, she flipped through her notes and looked up. Have you been feeling unwell over the last few months? She asked. Any symptoms that might now seem suspicious? And there it was, the question I'd been avoiding. Yes, I admitted, but I thought it was just age. I've been tired, dizzy sometimes. I've had days where I felt foggy, like my thoughts were wrapped in cotton. There were a couple of times I almost fell down the stairs because my vision blurred for a second. Were there any common factors on those days? She asked. Anything you ate or drank? Any visitors? The answer arrived fully formed, as if it had been waiting for permission to surface. Allison, I whispered. On the worst days, she'd been there earlier. She often brought tea, or soup, or some baked goods she'd made because she had too much at home. Marcus, who had insisted on being present for the interview, flinched as if I'd struck him. That doesn't mean, he began weakly, then faltered. Detective Lee's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. the faintest tightening around the edges. The flicker of recognition when a piece of a puzzle slides into place. "We're going to need to review your medical records," she said gently. "And Ms. Whitlock's. We'll also need consent to examine your home, medications, food, anything that might be relevant." "Do what you have to do," I said. For the first time in days, my voice felt solid. Later that afternoon, the doctor returned with more results. He looked more serious than before, if that was possible. "We ran more detailed analyses," he explained. "We didn't just find digoxin in your daughter-in-law's blood. We found traces of several cardiac medications. The pattern suggests exposure over a prolonged period, not just a single large dose." My stomach turned. "You're saying someone's been poisoning her gradually?" Marcus asked, bewildered. The doctor hesitated. "The pattern is consistent with someone who has been ingesting small amounts over time. That's all I can say with certainty. The police will interpret those findings." I thought of Allison's hands shaking at dinner in the weeks before. The way she complained of heart palpitations once, laughing it off as anxiety. I remembered how she'd brushed it aside as nothing. "But why?" Marcus muttered, more to himself than to us. Why would anyone do that? Who would want to hurt her? The doctor and I exchanged a look neither of us wanted to dissect. A few days later, I was sitting at home when Detective Lee knocked on my front door. She looked tired, but there was a new firmness in her posture. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said, "we've been looking into your daughter-in-law's background and her recent activities. There are some things you need to know." We sat in my living room, the same room where Allison had spent so many afternoons, always concerned, always helpful. The sight of her favorite mug on my coffee table made my skin crawl. "First," the detective said, "we've confirmed that your son is the primary beneficiary of your will." "Yes," I said. "He's my only child." "Does your daughter-in-law know this?" "Of course. I've never hidden it. She was the one who kept reminding me to get my affairs in order." The detective nodded, as if confirming something. "We've also discovered that in recent weeks, certain legal documents were drafted and signed, granting your son power of attorney under specific conditions and adjusting your estate planning." "At Allison's urging," I said quietly. "She told me my lawyer recommended it. I don't even remember the signing clearly. I felt strange that day. Foggy. Tired." "That's consistent with what we suspected," the detective said. "We've already contacted your attorney. He says he didn't draft those documents himself. His signature was forged." The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, I just stared at her, trying to process the weight of what she'd just said. "She forged them," I breathed. "Or had them forged," Detective Lee said. "In any case, they're invalid. We'll handle that. But there's something else you should know." She pulled a folder from her bag and slid a photograph across the coffee table toward me. It showed a woman in a nurse's uniform, hair slightly shorter and lighter than I was used to, but the face was unmistakable. "Allison worked as a certified nursing assistant for 5 years before marrying your son," the detective said. "She had access to medications. She knows how they work, what they do, and how they interact." Marcus, sitting beside me, looked like someone had punched the air out of his lungs. "Lots of people work in healthcare," he protested weakly. "That doesn't make them killers." "No," the detective agreed. "But patterns do. And your wife appears in the background of more than one troubling pattern." Another photograph joined the first on the table. An older woman, smiling broadly at the camera. Her eyes were bright, her posture straight, her presence somehow striking despite the ordinary background. "This is Eleanor Washington," the detective continued. "She died 2 years ago in an assisted living facility, Serenity Pines. Official cause of death, heart failure. She had been admitted there 6 months earlier after her family became concerned about sudden cognitive decline." "That's sad," Marcus said. "But what does that have to do with?" "The person who convinced Eleanor's family that she needed professional care," Detective Lee interrupted gently, "was her private caregiver at the time, a CNA named Allison Peters. She later changed her name to Whitlock." I felt the air thicken, pressing down on my chest. "Eleanor's granddaughter," the detective went on, "never believed the story. She's been looking for answers since her grandmother died. She recognized her daughter-in-law at Giovani's and has been watching her for weeks." I blinked. "The waitress," I whispered. "The young woman who gave me the note." Her name is Jada, the detective said. She's a nursing student now. She saw your daughter-in-law with you and your son, saw something that triggered her suspicions, and decided she couldn't stay quiet. My throat tightened. She wants to speak with you, the detective added, but only if you're willing. I was quiet for a moment, absorbing everything. My living room, once a sanctuary full of familiar objects, felt like a crime scene. Every cushion, every picture frame, every mug Allison had touched seemed contaminated. I'll talk to her, I said finally. If she had the courage to warn me, the least I can do is listen. We met in a coffee shop near the police station a few days later. Jada was younger than I'd realized, the sort of age where life still seems to stretch endlessly ahead. But there was a heaviness in her eyes that didn't belong to someone so young. Mrs. Montgomery, she asked when I walked in, standing quickly and reaching out her hand. I'm Jada. Please, I said, taking her hand. Call me Celeste. We sat. Her fingers worried at the sleeve of her sweater for a moment before she drew a breath and began. My grandmother, Eleanor, was everything to me, she said. She raised me when my parents were working double shifts. She was strong, sharp, independent, the kind of woman who read 3 newspapers a day and corrected them all. Her voice softened at the memory. She was still gardening at 78, still cooking Sunday dinners for the family. Then she fell at the supermarket, and this woman appeared out of nowhere. She introduced herself as a nursing assistant, said she'd help, said Grandma shouldn't be alone. I could already see where the story was going. My chest tightened. At first, we thought she was a blessing, Jada said. She came by often, bringing food, helping with errands. She said she didn't have much family of her own and that helping Grandma made her feel less lonely. We were grateful. We trusted her. She stared into her coffee, as if she could find answers at the bottom of the cup. But after a few months, she started saying Grandma was repeating herself, forgetting things, getting confused. She'd bring us articles about dementia, highlight symptoms, tell us, this is what I'm seeing. And then we started seeing it ourselves. Grandma seemed tired. She'd call me and forget we'd already talked earlier that day. She'd misplace things. We told ourselves it was age. We told ourselves Allison was helping. Allison, I bit the inside of my cheek. She was the one who suggested the facility, Jada continued. Serenity Pines. She said Grandma needed 24-hour care. She made us feel selfish for hesitating. So we agreed. We thought we were doing the right thing. She looked up, eyes shining. Grandma died 6 months later. Heart failure. No previous heart history. No warning signs until after she started spending time with Allison. I tried to ask questions. No one listened. She swallowed hard. When I saw her at Giovani's, she said, I almost didn't believe my eyes. She had a different hairstyle, a different last name, but it was her. I followed her on my break and watched her from a distance. The way she watched you, the way she hovered near your glass. When you and your son were talking, she leaned in and tipped something into your wine. Tiny motion. Quick. If I hadn't been watching it, I would have missed it. My hands clenched around my mug. I had 2 choices, Jada finished quietly. Walk away again, or do something. I didn't know if you would believe me, if you'd think I was crazy, but I couldn't watch another grandmother die. You saved my life, I said simply, the words thick with gratitude. I can never repay that. You already have, she replied softly. You lived. We sat in silence for a long time after that, each of us holding our own grief in our hands. What I didn't fully grasp then, but would come to understand later, was that Jada's courage that night hadn't just saved me. It had also finally dragged years of carefully hidden crimes into the light. Allison woke up 4 days after collapsing at Giovani's. When Detective Lee called to tell me, my first sensation was relief that surprised me. As terrified as I was of the woman Allison had revealed herself to be, I did not want her death on my conscience. I wanted the truth. I wanted accountability. I wanted a clear line drawn between what she had done and who I refused to become in response. She's conscious and physically stable, the detective said, but emotionally agitated. She's insisting there's been some mistake, that she was also a victim. She's asking to see you. Do I have to? I asked, already knowing the answer. You're under no obligation, she said. But in our experience, sometimes confronting a suspect directly can prompt useful admissions. Only if you feel safe, and your son and an officer will be present. I thought about it for a long moment. For months, Allison had quietly rewritten the story of my life, casting me as a confused old woman and herself as the benevolent guardian. She had changed the way my own son looked at me. She turned my home into a stage where she directed every scene. If I didn't face her now, I knew that shadow might never fully lift. "I'll do it," I said eventually. But Marcus comes with me. At the hospital the next afternoon, Marcus walked beside me like a bodyguard, his jaw set. There was a rawness to him now, a woundedness I recognized in myself. We had both been living inside a lie. Two uniformed officers stood outside Allison's room. When they let us in, the first thing I saw was how small she looked. She was propped up against white pillows, her hair limp around her face. Fur lines trailed from her arms. Her skin was pale, but it was her eyes that arrested me, still sharp, still calculating, even as they filled with tears on command. "Celeste," she breathed when she saw me. "Thank God you're okay. I've been so worried." She reached a hand toward me. I did not take it. "We know," I said, my voice steady if not strong. "We know what you did." She blinked, her expression shifting into confusion so perfectly it could have been rehearsed. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Someone tried to poison us. Both of us. We're victims in this, not." "Don't," Marcus said roughly, stepping forward. "Don't lie to her anymore." Allison's attention snapped to him. For the first time, something like fear flashed across her face. "Marcus," she said, her voice breaking. "Sweetheart, what has she told you? You know your mother has been confused. That's why They found the medications in our house," he said, his voice shaking with restrained fury. "They found the forged documents. They traced the searches on your computer. They know about the others. About Eleanor. About the facility. About all of it." The effort of denial flickered across her face and then dropped. The mask she'd worn for years slid away, leaving something much colder underneath. "You're overreacting," she said flatly. "You're letting them twist everything." I stepped forward, careful to keep the bed between us. "Tell me something, Allison," I said softly. "What did you tell yourself all those months you were poisoning me? That you were helping? That you were doing me a kindness?" She stared at me, and for a moment I saw something like annoyance, like I was being stubborn about accepting a gift. "You're 62, Celeste," she said, voice suddenly devoid of pretense. "You weren't going to live forever. You were already slowing down. You're going to end up needing full-time care, draining your savings on some impersonal facility. I was trying to make that process easier. For everyone." "Easier?" Marcus asked, stunned. "By killing her? That's such an ugly word," Allison replied coolly. "I never wanted pain for anyone. I just wanted control, so things wouldn't spiral. So you and I could build a life without constantly worrying about whether your mother left the stove on, or wandered off, or emptied her accounts on some nonsense because she was confused." The clinical calm in her tone made my skin crawl. "And the money?" I asked. "Was that just a bonus?" She sighed, as if explaining a simple truth to a slow student. "Money is power, Celeste. Security. Opportunity. Your generation hoards it, then expects us to patiently wait while you linger for decades. Meanwhile, we struggle. We stress. We get buried under debt. Why is it wrong to shift the balance a little sooner? You weren't using that money yet. Not the way we could." There was the core of her logic, naked and obscene. Elderly live with inconveniences. Savings as unclaimed spoils. Murder as balance. "And Eleanor?" I asked, thinking of Jada. "The other women? Did you tell yourself you were doing them favors too?" Allison's eyes hardened. "Eleanor was lonely," she said. "Her family visited when it was convenient. I was the one there every day. I was the one who held her hand. I made sure she wasn't in pain at the end. Can you say the same for all the elderly people wasting away alone in facilities right now?" "You poison her," I said, slowly, methodically, while convincing her that she was losing her mind. I guided her, Allison snapped, toward an outcome that was coming anyway. "None of them are going to live forever." "Neither are you," Marcus said quietly. But you didn't see anyone slipping something into your glass, did you? The room went very still. Detective Lee, who had been standing quietly in the corner, finally spoke. Mrs. Whitlock, she said calmly, are you aware that we've documented your online searches? The purchases of medications under other names? The forged legal documents? We have testimony from multiple witnesses, including Ms. Reynolds, describing your behavior before several of these deaths. For a flicker of a moment, I saw panic in Allison's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by a brittle sort of arrogance. You can twist anything to look guilty if you try hard enough, she said. I was under a lot of stress. I wasn't thinking clearly. The doctors will tell you I've been struggling. I didn't know what I was doing. There are years of planning here, the detective replied evenly. Patterns, repetition, financial moves timed around these deaths. That's not confusion, Mrs. Whitlock. That's the intention. Allison's mouth pressed into a thin line. You're all determined to make me the monster, she said. Fine. Go ahead. Tell your stories. Cry on a stand. They'll eat it up. But remember this, Celeste. Without me, you really would have ended up old and helpless, rotting away in some bargain bin facility. At least I had standards. She delivered the words like a final blow, as if she wanted to leave a scar. But something unexpected happened inside me. Instead of crumpling under her cruelty, I felt a new steadiness unfold, like a tree that had bent under storms for years and was finally rooted deeply enough to resist. You know what, Allison? I said quietly. The worst thing you did wasn't slipping poison into my tea. It wasn't forging documents or manipulating my son. The worst thing you did was make me doubt myself. You made me question my own mind, my value, my place in my own life. And you know what? You failed. I'm still here. My mind is clear. My son and I are closer than we've been in years. You didn't cut my story short. You just set the stage for the best chapters yet. For the first time, something like real rage flickered in her eyes. Stupid old woman, she hissed. You should have been grateful. I was offering you a dignified exit. Now you'll just drag on and on, a constant reminder to everyone of how pathetic it is to get old. Maybe, I said, or maybe I'll be a reminder that people like you can be stopped. That no matter how carefully you plan, you can't account for every stranger's kindness. You didn't see Jada coming. That's what undid you, not me. Her. Allison opened her mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left for her to say that wouldn't deepen the hole she'd already dug. When we left the room, Marcus's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. In the hallway, he collapsed onto a nearby bench, burying his face in his hands. I married her, he whispered. I brought her into our family. I believed her over you. How do I ever forgive myself for that? You don't, I said gently, sitting beside him. Not in the way you mean. You learn from it. You let it change how you listen, how you trust. But you don't spend the rest of your life flogging yourself for not seeing a mask that was designed to fool you. I should have noticed, he insisted. You did notice, I said quietly. You just explained it away. Because the alternative was too awful to consider. That's what she counted on. That's what manipulators always count on. That we'd rather doubt ourselves than doubt the people we love. His shoulders shook. I put my arm around him, and for a moment we sat like that. Mother and son, both grieving the same person in different ways. Allison eventually confessed. According to Detective Lee, once she realized how much evidence they had gathered, and once it became clear her insanity defense would crumble under the sheer level of premeditation, she began to talk. 2 other elderly women joined the list of her victims. Both had stories similar to mine and Eleanor's: sudden cognitive decline, pressure to enter care facilities, unexplained cardiac failure. Her confession didn't feel like justice to me. It felt like a sad inventory of lives she had taken and futures she had casually erased. But it did something important. It removed doubt. There would be no whispered what-ifs, no second-guessing about mistaken diagnoses. The truth was plain, documented, and recorded. At trial, I took the stand for 2 full days. I told the jury about the note at Giovani's, about the tea and soup and baked goods, about the days when I'd felt too confused to trust my own memory, about signing documents I barely remembered. I described how Allison had gently, persistently painted me as someone on the verge of decline. I watched jurors' faces change as I spoke. At first, some looked skeptical. Elderly people forgot things, after all. But as the testimony mounted from doctors, from financial experts, from Jada, from families of the other victims, skepticism gave way to horror. Jada's testimony was the hardest to hear. She spoke about her grandmother's decline with a composure far beyond her years, her hands trembling only once, when she described Eleanor whispering that she felt foggy after taking the vitamins Allison insisted on giving her. She stole my grandmother's last months, Jada told the court. She stole them from all of us. I won't get those back, but I refuse to let her keep doing it to other families. The verdict, when it came, was inevitable. Guilty, on all counts. The judge sentenced Allison to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. There were words about abuse of trust, about premeditation, about vulnerable victims. None of it brought Eleanor back. None of it erased the months of fear I had lived through. But it did something that mattered. It drew a firm, bright line between Allison and the rest of us. The system had called her what she was, out loud, where the world could hear it. That, at least, felt like a beginning. 6 months after that night at Giovani's, I woke up and realized I had done something I once thought impossible. I'd gone a whole week without assuming every strange sensation in my body was poison. My mornings have a new rhythm now. I made coffee in a kitchen that no longer smelled faintly of the tea Allison favored. I wrote lists on a pad by the fridge and enjoyed the quiet thrill of knowing I still remembered everything on them without needing to check constantly. I no longer triple-checked the stove or walked back through every room before leaving the house to make sure nothing dangerous had been forgotten. Most importantly, I trusted my own mind again. After the trial, I made a decision that surprised even me. I sold my house. For years, that little brick home had been my haven. It was where Marcus had taken his first steps, when my husband and I had argued and made up 1,000 times, where I'd planted roses and buried pets and hosted Christmas dinners. It was full of laughter and tears and the sort of clutter that accumulates when you live in one place long enough. But it had also become a mausoleum for a version of me that Allison had carefully cultivated, the confused, declining woman who needed constant supervision. Every corner held a ghost of that lie, so I let it go. I found a small house near Lake Lanier, about an hour's drive from Atlanta. It had a modest yard with soil that felt rich and promising beneath my fingers, and a porch that faced east, catching the sunrise in a way that made the whole world look newly washed every morning. The first time I stood on that porch with a mug of coffee, watching the sun climb over the water, I felt something inside me loosen. The lake glittered, boats cut lazy lines across the surface, and the air smelled like damp earth and possibility. I planted new flowers in new beds. I planted tomatoes and lettuce and herbs in neat rows. I planted citrus trees in pots along the porch. After months of feeling like a body someone else was slowly erasing, there was something profoundly healing about coaxing life out of the ground. Marcus began visiting every Sunday. The first few months after the trial, he'd been suffocated by guilt. Therapy helped. Time helped. So did the simple, stubborn fact that we kept showing up for each other. On one of those Sundays, as we chopped vegetables together for lunch, he said something that stuck with me. Part of me always knew something was wrong, he admitted, laying his knife down. But if you were sick, I could be the hero, the good son who took care of his mother. If Allison was lying, that would mean you brought danger into my life, I finished gently. That's not an easy truth to live with. He nodded. It was easier to think you were slipping than to admit I'd chosen badly, that I trusted someone who could do all of that. I looked at him, this man I had raised, and felt a fierce swell of love. We both wanted to believe in her, I said. I wanted a daughter. You wanted a partner. There's no shame in wanting to love and be loved. The shame belongs to the person who used that against us. We resumed chopping, the rhythm of knives on cutting boards steadying us. We were no longer tiptoeing around the subject of Allison. We had named the wound, and that made it easier to heal. Jada became a regular presence in my life, too. Our coffee shop meetings turned into something more like a friendship. She came to the lake sometimes, sleeves rolled up, laughing as she knelt in the dirt beside me to help weed the garden. We talked about her classes, about her grief, about the strange way tragedy can bind strangers together. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the light glitter on the water, she turned to me with an expression that was both determined and shy. "I've decided what I want to do after I graduate," she said. "I want to specialize in geriatric care, work with older adults, help them stay independent as long as possible, help them feel safe." I smiled. "That sounds like important work." "You inspired it," she admitted. "Watching what you went through, how you fought to get your life back, it made me realize how easily people can be written off as confused or declining when something else is going on. I want to be the person in the room who asks, 'Are we sure?'" Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. I decided to help pay for the rest of her schooling. I didn't tell her at first. When she found out, she cried and tried to refuse. "You don't owe me anything," she protested. "I know," I said. "That's why I want to do it. Not because I owe you, because I believe in the person you're becoming." In a strange way, it felt like honoring Eleanor too. A piece of her granddaughter's future built on something other than grief. I also began speaking publicly. It started with a support group at the hospital where I'd been treated, then expanded to community centers, churches, and senior groups. I told my story, not for sympathy, but as a warning. I talked about subtle signs of financial manipulation, of gaslighting, of caregivers who seemed a little too eager to control medications and schedules. After every talk, people came up to me with their own stories. A woman whose son-in-law had insisted she turn over control of her bank account because online banking was too complicated for her. A man whose father's forgetful episodes always seemed to happen after visits from a new home health aide. A couple who'd been guilt-tripped into signing over property to a relative for convenience. I couldn't solve all their problems, but I could give them language. I could say, trust that uneasy feeling. Ask more questions. Demand clarity. Your life is not a burden. Your savings are not a prize. You matter. That, I realized, was my quiet revenge. Not screaming at Allison in a courtroom. Not writing her furious letters that would never change her. But using what she'd done to me to fortify other people against people like her. One afternoon, sorting the mail, I found an envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front stopped my breath. Inside was a letter from Allison. The tone was exactly what I expected, self-pitying, bitter, devoid of real remorse. She blamed the court, the media, me, and society. She complained about the food, the noise, the lack of privacy in prison. She cast herself as a misunderstood visionary who had tried to fix the broken system of elder care. It ended with one last twist of her warped logic. "Someday, you'll realize the favor I tried to do you," she wrote. "I gave your life meaning. Before me, you were just an old woman fading quietly. Now you're somebody." I read it once, then again, and then, unexpectedly, I laughed. Not because anything about her crimes was funny, but because at that moment, it became almost painfully clear how small she really was. How dependent she had always been on other people's fear to feel powerful. She hadn't given my life meaning. I had raised a son alone, survived widowhood, built a home, loved friends, nurtured a garden. I had a full life long before she swept into it with her carefully rehearsed concern. She had not elevated me. She had merely revealed the strength that was already there. That night, I burned the letter in my fireplace. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the inked words disappearing in tiny bursts of orange flame. It felt less like destroying evidence and more like a ritual, an intentional severing of the last thread connecting her to my day-to-day existence. Sitting on my porch the next morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the lake, I took stock of what I had lost and what I had gained. I had lost my illusion that everyone who smiles at you means well. I had lost the comforting belief that evil always wears a visible mask. I had lost a piece of my trust in the world's basic kindness. But I had gained other things. I had gained a deeper trust in myself, one that no longer depended on other people's approval. I had gained clarity about my own worth, independent of my age, my bank account, or my usefulness to others. I had gained a stronger, more honest relationship with my son, forged in the fire of shared ordeal. I had gained a friend in Jada, a young woman who had refused to stay quiet when silence would have been easier. Through her, I had also gained a connection to Eleanor and the other women whose names I would never know, but whose stories now lived inside mine. Most of all, I had gained peace. Not a naive peace that pretends bad things don't happen, but a seasoned peace that knows they do and believes we can survive them anyway. Every Sunday, when Marcus arrives for lunch, he comes bearing groceries and new recipes. We cook together, side by side, the way we used when he was small. We argue about seasonings and laugh when something comes out a little too crispy. Sometimes Sarah joins us, the woman he met in a support group. Gentle, open, unafraid of honesty. She doesn't try to insert herself into every corner of our lives. She doesn't flinch when my age shows. She just fits. He tells me now often, "I'll listen to you, Mom. If you say something feels wrong, I'll believe you." And I tell him, "I don't need you to protect me from everything. I just need you to trust me. I spent a lot of years taking care of you. Let me take care of myself, too." At 62, my life is not over. In some ways, it feels like it's just beginning again, this time with my eyes wide open. I know now that betrayal doesn't always come in the form of strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes it wears a familiar smile and offers to help with your groceries. Sometimes it calls you Mom and insists it's worried about your health. But I also know something else. Salvation doesn't always arrive in dramatic, cinematic gestures. Sometimes it's a tired waitress with a scrap of paper and the courage to slide it quietly onto your table. My name is Celeste. I am not a confused old woman whose story was nearly ended by someone else's greed. I am a survivor, a gardener, a mother, a friend. A woman who woke up in the middle of someone else's script and refused to speak her assigned lines. Every sunrise over the lake, every Sunday lunch, every new plant pushing through the soil is my answer to Allison's belief that I was just an inconvenience to be managed. I'm still here, and that, more than any verdict or sentence, is the truest, sweetest revenge.